London, 1969. A city alive with noise, light, and movement. Yet in its northern heights there stood a place where the world seemed to fall strangely silent. Highgate Cemetery. A vast Victorian graveyard of towering monuments, crumbling vaults, and shadowed avenues where the dead had lain undisturbed for over a century. By day, it was a place of history and quiet reflection. But by night, it became something else entirely. In the winter of that year, a man walking along Swain's Lane reported seeing something inside those walls, something standing among the graves, watching him from the darkness. At first, it was dismissed, a trick of light, a shadow, an overactive imagination on a cold December night. But then others came forward. Different people, different nights, the same description. A tall grey figure, silent, unmoving, and somehow aware. What began as a single sighting soon grew into one of the most infamous hauntings in British history, drawing crowds, fear, and whispers of something far worse than a ghost. This is the story of what was seen inside Highgate Cemetery, and the night when someone realized something inside was looking back. It was Christmas Eve, and the cold had settled into everything. Iron railings, black branches, stone steps, and the damp road that curved past the heights of Highgate. The city below still lived in patches of amber light, but up there the lamps seemed weaker, as though the night itself pressed against them. Highgate Cemetery rose behind its walls in ranks of shadow, tangled yew, leaning angels, and old Victorian stonework, beautiful by day and oppressive after dusk. He had walked that road before. There was nothing unusual in that. Nothing unusual in the stillness either. Cemeteries at night had their own sort of silence, heavier than the silence of a field or an empty street. It was the silence of names cut into stone, of locked vaults, of long memories sealed under earth. You noticed it even if you pretended not to. At first he thought the shape ahead of him was only a trick of distance, a patch of fog perhaps, a shifting of light beyond the railings. The cemetery wall was broken here and there by gates and glimpses into the old ground beyond. Moonlight, when it touched the higher monuments, sometimes made them appear unnaturally pale. A man walking alone could convince himself of many things on a winter night, but this was not moonlight. Something was standing inside the cemetery. He slowed. The shape was upright, not fixed like stone, and not mist either. It had the outline of a person and yet seemed wrong in its proportions, as if it were partly there and partly withheld from sight. Grey, not white, not black, but a deadened grey that seemed to gather rather than reflect the faint light around it. He could not make out a face. That was the most disturbing part. It gave the impression of looking directly at him, yet offered no features by which the eye could confirm it. He stopped at the railings. For a long moment neither moved. The figure stood among the graves with a stillness no living body could maintain in that bitter cold. No shifting of the feet, no breath, no glance aside. Only that fixed, terrible presence, distant but undeniably aware. Then it moved, not in the ordinary way a man moves, by stepping from one place to another, but by seeming to pass forward through the dark, between the monuments, with a kind of smooth, silent intention. Its progress was steady and gliding. Branches hung across the view. One instant it was partially hidden by them. The next it had emerged farther on. though he had not seen the motion that brought it there. He stepped back from the railings. Every nerve in him was now telling him the same thing. Whatever stood inside that cemetery was not merely an intruder, not a drunk, not some late mourner wandering among family plots. The place around it seemed altered. The darkness itself looked different where it passed, as though the shadows leaned toward it. He kept his eyes fixed on it. The figure had come close enough now that he should, by all reason, have been able to distinguish clothing, limbs, some human detail. Instead, the outline remained uncertain, heavy at the shoulders, narrow below, more suggested than seen. It seemed less like a person standing in the graveyard than like a stain rising from it. The road behind him was empty. No footsteps approached, no motor car passed. London, vast as it was, might have ceased to exist beyond that hill. There was only the lane, the railings, the cemetery, and the thing watching from within. He would later struggle to explain why he did not immediately run. Curiosity, perhaps, or the strange paralysis that sometimes comes before fear catches up with itself. There is a point at which the mind still clings to ordinary explanations, even while the body understands none will do. The figure turned. He was certain of that, though again there was no natural motion to it. One moment it faced him, the next it had shifted, as though some invisible hand had rotated it toward the deeper grounds. Beyond it, the cemetery descended in terraces and avenues lined with tombs, catacombs, and overgrown paths. The thing seemed to be considering whether to withdraw into that labyrinth, or whether to come closer still. Then a sound broke the stillness. Not loud, only the distant bark of a dog from somewhere down the hill. But it was enough. The figure was suddenly farther away. He blinked, unsure whether he had lost sight of it for a second. It stood now between taller monuments, diminished by distance yet unmistakable. Then it passed behind one leaning stone cross, and did not appear again. He remained where he was, staring through the bars, until the cold began to burn in his fingers. He searched the avenues beyond the gate, the dark between vaults, the pale edges of memorials. Nothing moved, nothing returned, and yet he could not rid himself of the certainty that the thing was still there, not gone, only withdrawn, watching from somewhere deeper inside the cemetery, where the paths grew wild and the neglected graves sank beneath ivy and winter rot. In the days that followed, he spoke of what he had seen. That might have been the end of it, had no one answered. A single sighting can be dismissed, even by the witness himself, once daylight returns and the ordinary business of life begins to reassert its hold. But others had their own stories. They wrote in, they came forward, a tall man in a hat, a pale shape gliding among the graves, bells heard where none should ring, a woman in white, a face staring through bars, voices calling in the night. Soon the cemetery no longer held a single apparition, but an atmosphere of expectation, as if Highgate had become a stage on which the unseen had begun to gather. And this is where the story darkened, because a graveyard may tolerate rumours for years without incident. Rumours alone do not wound stone. They do not break locks. They do not set minds alight. But Highgate in those years was already vulnerable. Beautiful, decaying, overgrown, and partly abandoned to neglect. To say a place is haunted is sometimes enough to summon not spirits, but people. Sensation seekers, occultists, vandals, believers, liars, fools, and those who cannot tell the difference between fear and fascination. The whispers spread across North London. There were stories of rituals among the tombs, stories of animals found dead, stories of a presence so strong that even those who had not seen it avoided certain paths by night. Some claimed it was no ghost at all, but something older and worse, something that needed blood, something imported from darker soil and buried among the dead. The word vampire began to attach itself to the cemetery like a burr, and once that happened, reason retreated further with every retelling. But strip away the headlines, and the heart of the matter remains simpler and more unsettling. A witness walked past a cemetery on a winter night and saw something he could not explain. Others, unprompted, described strange presences of their own. That is often how hauntings begin, not with a grand revelation, but with a single quiet rupture in the ordinary order of things. One man sees a figure where no figure should be. Another hears a voice. A third notices that the air near one monument feels wrong, heavier, colder, resistant to intrusion. The legend builds afterward. The fear comes later, when separate people discover they have all been circling the same dark center. Imagine then Highgate as it stood at the turn of that decade, the grand Egyptian avenue with its solemn portals, the circle of Lebanon ringed with old vaults, angels furred with moss, branches hanging low over cracked paths, rainwater black in depressions of stone, long corridors of monuments, where the eye never entirely trusted what it saw ahead. Even by day the cemetery could feel theatrical, as if designed to remind the living that death had architecture, hierarchy, and taste. By night, stripped of visitors and softened by dark, it became something else entirely. Not a place of memory, but a place of return. Suppose you entered it after midnight. You would tell yourself the sensation in your chest was only nerves. You would take a torch, perhaps, and watch the beams strike names, dates, broken urns. Your steps would sound too loud. Brambles would catch at your coat. Somewhere above, a fox might cry out in a voice so like a human scream that your skin would tighten at once. Then you would reach one of those deeper paths where the monuments stand closer together and the trees make a roof of their own. And there, beyond the range of the torch, you might notice that someone appears to be standing ahead of you. The natural thing would be to call out. Yet many stories die at that point, because the witness does not call. Something in him resists making contact. He waits instead, trying to understand what he sees. The figure does not answer, because perhaps it has not been addressed, or perhaps it has. The witness then takes another step and realizes the shape has changed position without sound. No snapped twig, no scraping shoe, no shift in breathing, only a different arrangement of darkness where a shape continues to be. That is Highgate's true terror. Not fangs, not melodrama, not newspaper panic. The deeper fear is that the dead ground itself may produce an observer, something half visible, patient, not violent at first, but intent, a presence that does not need to chase because it is already where it wishes to be. On the Friday night, when crowds later descended on the cemetery in excitement and morbid curiosity, they came looking for spectacle. What they found instead was chaos. Police, trespass, broken order, the old graves violated by the living in pursuit of the dead. The haunting had become public by then, and public hauntings are almost always corrupted by the people they attract. But the original image survived all that noise. The grey figure beyond the railings, silent and inexplicable, seen alone on a cold December night. Perhaps that is why the story endures. Had it been only a matter of lurid claims, it would have faded into the long shelf of British oddities. But there is something unnervingly restrained about the first account. No thunder, no attack, no dramatic pronouncement. Just a man passing a cemetery and realizing that something inside it had noticed him. And if that is true, even once, then every old graveyard changes. Because from then on, the railings no longer separate the living from the dead as securely as they should. They become, instead, a boundary across which things may look back. People still walk by Highgate at dusk. They admire its avenues, its famous dead, its grandeur and melancholy. Most see only what is there to be seen: stone, leaf, ivy, and history. Yet every haunted place retains a kind of second shape inside itself, formed from all the moments in which the ordinary world failed to hold. Highgate's second shape is tall, grey, and watchful. It stands just beyond clear sight. It waits among the graves. And on certain winter evenings, when the lane is empty, and the light is failing, and the railings are cold to the touch, a passer-by may feel, before seeing anything at all, that he is not alone beside the wall, that someone is standing within, still, facing outward, waiting for him to stop.